Hello again. I'm going to read you one of my favourite Julia Donaldson stories. Which is your favourite one? Well, my favourite is The Smartest Giant in Town. Do you remember in Assembly we looked at how Julia Donaldson had reimagined some of her stories, and he was being the cleanest giant in town because he'd got really good at washing his hands? Well, this is the original story, so today he's going to be the smartest giant in town. Here we go. George was a giant. He was the scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown sandals and the same old patched up gown. I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town, he said sadly. But one day George noticed a new shop. It was full of smart clothes, so he bought a smart shirt, a smart pair of trousers, a smart belt, a smart stripy tie, some smart socks with diamonds up the sides, and a pair of smart shiny shoes. Now I'm the smartest giant in town, he said proudly. George left his old clothes behind at the shop. He was about to go home when he heard a sound. On the pavement stood a giraffe who was sniffing sadly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my neck," said the giraffe. "It's so very long and so very cold. I wish I had a nice warm scarf." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his stripy tie. "It didn't match my socks anyway," he said, as he wound it round and round the giraffe's neck. It made a wonderful scarf. "Thank you," said the giraffe. As George strode towards home, he sang to himself. "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look me up and down. I'm the smartest giant in town." Can you see the other giant in town? There's lots of small people, but there's one giant in this picture as well. Can you see her? She's popping out from behind the houses, look. George came to a river. On a boat stood a goat who was bleating loudly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sail," said the goat. "It blew away in a storm. I wish I had a strong new sail for my boat." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new white shirt. "It kept coming untucked anyway," he said, and he tied it to the mast of the goat's boat. It made a magnificent sail. "Thank you," said the goat. As George strode on, he sang to himself. "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. But look me up and down. I'm the smartest giant in town." George came to a tiny, ruined house. Beside the house stood a white mouse with lots of baby mice. They were all squeaking. You see them there? "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's our house," squeaked the mother mouse. "It burned down and now we have nowhere to live. I wish we had a nice new house." Oh dear, it's a bit of a disaster, isn't it? Look at that. "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his shiny shoes. "It was giving me blisters anyway," he said, as the mouse and her baby scrambled inside. The shoe made a perfect home for them. "Thank you," they squeaked. George had to hop along the road now, but he didn't mind. As he hopped, he sang to himself. "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. But look me up and down. I'm the smartest giant in town." George came to a campsite. Beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sleeping bag," said the fox. "It dropped in a puddle. I wish I had a nice, warm, dry sleeping bag." Do you think George can help? What could he use as a sleeping bag, do you think? Let's see if you're right. "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his socks with the diamonds up the sides. "It was tickling my toes anyway," he said, as the fox snuggled into it. It made a very fine sleeping bag. "Thank you," said the fox. George hopped on, singing to himself. "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox, but look me up and down, I'm the smartest giant in town. Look, who's he passing on the road? There's a princess. Can you see whose hand she's holding? What normally happens if a princess kisses a frog in fairy tales? Normally he turns into a prince. Perhaps she didn't want a prince. Perhaps she wanted a frog, that particular princess. George came to a big squelchy bog. Beside the bog stood a dog who was howling. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's this bog," said the dog. "I need to get across, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a safe, dry path." So do you think George is going to be able to help? So he's used his shirt, he's used his tie, he's used his socks, he's used one of his shoes. What else has he got left? What could make a nice, safe, dry path across the bog if you were giant size? Let's see if you're right. "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his smart new belt. "It was squishing my tummy anyway," he said, as he laid it down over the bog. "It made an excellent path." "Thank you," said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat, my shoe is a house for a little white mouse, one of my socks is a bed for a fox, my belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog, but..." Do you know what happens next? What can you see is already happening in the picture? Let's see if you're right. "My trousers are falling down. I'm the coldest giant in town." Oh no, it's because he took his belt off. Suddenly George felt sad and shivery and not at all smart. He stood on one foot and thought, "I'll have to go back to the shop and buy some more clothes," he decided. He turned round and hopped all the way back to the shop. Gosh, that must be tricky. Outside his front door stood all the animals that he had helped. They were carrying an enormous present. "Come on, George," they said. "Open it." George untied the ribbon. Inside was a beautiful gold paper crown and card. Can you see it there? Look. That's nice, isn't it? "Look inside the card, George," said the animals. George put the crown on his head and opened the card. "Your tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat, your shoe is a house for a little white mouse, one of your socks is a bed for a fox, your belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog, so here is a very fine crown to go with your sandals and gown of the kindest giant in town." So we know that this giant can be the cleanest giant in town. He was at one point the smartest giant in town, but most importantly, he's the kindest giant in town. And look how many friends he made because of it. Hope you enjoyed that. See you next time.